You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
And welcome back, Los Angeles. What's going on, Chargers fans? This is the LA Football Show here on the LA Football Network, live on the Mightier 1090 ESPN Radio. Final segment here. We're talking all thing Bolts as we preview training camp coming up at Jack Hammett Sports Park in Costa Mesa, California. Back with me on radio, but if you're on the podcast, you probably don't see him many on the Chargers side as he's mostly our Rams writer, but he is our managing editor over at the LA Football Network, so does all things LA football, even started writing some Chargers pieces. My man, Skinny T. Ryan Anderson. What's up, brother? Welcome back for the Chargers segment of the show.
Oh, it's such a good time to be on the Chargers podcast here, the Chargers radio. I'm going to be down at Chargers camp for the very first time. I've been going to the Rams, but I'm going to do double duty. I'm going to bring you guys the best news I can from Costa Mesa. So stay tuned for that.
Love it. Yeah, it's always – they're long days, as you'll learn, because I've done it a few times. But it is nice that, you know, Costa Mesa, where the Chargers do training camp, and Irvine, where the Rams are pretty much only 20 minutes apart. And the Chargers always do morning 9 to 11, and the Rams always do evening 4 to 6. So it's like you can do both. It's just – a long ass day. So prepare for that. Plenty of water, plenty of sunscreen. What's nice though is you get a nice 3-hour break. So I usually go, I found this one bar in like the Newport area that I'll bring my laptop. I'll write a little Chargers report. I'll prep some Ram stuff, have a cold one and a nice sandwich. We'll probably go together because I'll probably be with you, but we'll take you there and see if they remember me from last year. Probably won't, but hey, maybe they will. But anyway, excited to get back into it. Show is always brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag. Use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. Gets you a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Tell me guys at the LA Football Network sent you. So, Ryan, before we get into Chargers talk, I got to tell a quick story, and I want you to just jump in here. And I just got back from vacation. For those listening on radio or podcasts, you know, Jamal and Will filled in. Well, Jamal's always with me, but Will filled in for me, and Jamal kind of ran the show, and they did a great job. But I was gone, family reunion out in Minnesota, right outside a small town called Fergus Falls. And so how do I want to start this story? Jump in whenever. But so me and Ryan finally met in person. Was this, 3 years ago at the draft?
2021 draft.
2021 draft. So 2.5 years ago, basically. Ish, right? Yeah, something like that. So Ryan had been writing for the site, so we had talked virtually over email, over Slack, over Facebook Messenger, whatever. Like knew each other decently over that, but finally kind of realized we lived like 10 minutes apart. We're doing a little draft party at the Lion Hotel in Koreatown. Like, hey, let's do a live show. Come hang out. So we finally met in person. So we're kind of just catching up, you know, as old chaps would do, or first time chaps would do, I guess, and kind of learning about each other. And I don't even know how did it come up. Basically, I just asked like, oh, where are you from? Or like, where's your family from?
Yeah, something like that. Something like that. And I said, you know, I'm from, a town in northern Minnesota. Grand Rapids is where I'm from originally. Grand Rapids, Minnesota, not in Michigan, the other one. And you mentioned that your grandparents have a place in Minnesota in a place called Fergus Falls. Yeah. I think I said, oh, my grandma ran a restaurant in Fergus Falls called the Calico Rose. And it's already kind of weird at this point. Like Fergus Falls, like
14,000 people.
How many people have ever even heard of Fergus Falls or Otter Tail Park and all this stuff? So I was already my mind was blown. And I said, my grandma ran the Calico Rose. And you kind of paused and said, my grandparents ran the Calico Rose.
Yeah.
And so there's only two options. Either we're related.
Yeah.
And my grandma had other grandchildren that I didn't know about,
and we found out we were both Scandinavian. So we're like, is this a possibility? Like Anderson, Dyrud, like, what are you, Swedish technically? No, I'm Norwegian.
I'm Swedish.
But it's like, you know, there's could be some relation there. But anyway, we found out and confirmed, obviously, that my grandparents sold the Calico Rose to Skinny T's grandma, and then they ran it. And then I found out later that it ended up going back to my grandparents after, and then sold to become like a Chinese restaurant or something. And now it's a Mexican restaurant called Don Pablo's, one of the only Mexican restaurants in beautiful little Fergus Falls. So crazy story. I mean, what a small world.
Yeah.
Small world.
Yeah.
And
I don't even know what to do with that coincidence. It's so weird, but it means good things. That's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah. I mean, we met in one of the biggest cities in the world, Los Angeles. Crazy. We called that day. We called my grandparents because I was just like blown away. And they're like, "Oh yeah," and they said your grandparents' name, and so they knew. But I told the rest of my family for the first time on this trip. We were like all sitting around at the Airbnb, like 20 of us having some drinks, talking. I was like, "I don't know if you guys heard this." Everyone was just blown away. They're like, "Oh." So what I didn't know is my dad at the time, he was 16. He was the head chef of the Calico Rose for my grandparents. The head chef at 16. When my grandparents sold to your grandparents, they didn't have a chef in line to take over. So my dad stayed on staff and worked for your grandparents for a few months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So how wild is that? I didn't know that till last week when I found that out, that my dad actually worked for them for a while they hired their own staff. And he trained the new staff. Yeah.
Anyway, we'll talk later about that, but I brought it up to your dad and he didn't say anything about it, but anyway.
I think even he kind of forgot because it was my aunt that said it and he was there and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's right." Like he probably, 16, he probably didn't remember exactly. I don't know. But anyway, wild. So that being said, just wanted to share that back from vacation. Glad to be back in 105-degree Los Angeles. Hopefully it's a little cooler temperatures down in Costa Mesa. It's funny, around the first years they did training camp at Costa Mesa, they have these tall bleachers that are basically directly in the sun. And they had no like covering at all. Like the best thing about going to Irvine for the Rams, they had like those coverings over the bleachers that you can get shade. Yeah. The Chargers I want to say almost the first 2 years had nothing. So you would just, even though it was 9 a.m, you would just start melting in these bleachers. Well, now after, I think it might be the last 2 years, they have put a little covering over there. It's still, because it's so early, the sun's rising, so it's still like directly on you, but you at least get a little relief from it. Cause it's just wild how hot it gets at 9 a.m, even in Costa Mesa, right by the beach kind of.
Wow, I'm glad they figured that out.
Yeah, I think either they got enough complaints or they realized themselves like someone's gonna have like a stroke out here or something. But anyway, so this might be a easy question for you since this will be your first time going to the Chargers camp. I asked you this on the Rams segment, but I'll ask you it again on the Chargers segment. So many fun storylines for this Chargers team. A true contender, I would say, top 5 quarterback in football. A polarizing coach in the sense that he's considered a defensive guru, but hasn't quite had the success at the head coaching level yet. And a defense that has underperformed, but it has a lot of big names on the roster. So heading into training camp, all that being said, what are you most looking forward to witnessing while we're down there?
I'm excited for the rookie receivers the most. Quentin Johnson, how they're going to implement him. And then Darius Davis. I always get excited to see the speed and how that's utilized.
Yep.
I've never seen a Bosa in person. So I'm excited to see Joey Bosa. Yeah. And I'm just kind of excited to get to know it a little bit. I learned so much from watching how Sean McVay runs his practices, how each position coach kind of works with their team or their group. And so I'm just excited to get to know the Chargers and how they you learn a lot from just observing how things go. So yeah, that's the biggest thing.
That's the absolutely. And it'll be fun to talk with you because I've done this myself on the show, but how, if any, differences like Chargers camp versus Rams camp are run. And when Anthony Lynn was still the coach, it was like, in my opinion, it was very different how the Chargers camp was run versus Rams camp. Now Staley running it, obviously had a year with the Rams. It's still different, but it has a lot more similarities. The biggest thing I noticed with Staley, which I'm curious if he'll change at all, is he would script out practice. And if they were on it and finished early, they finished early. Like they wouldn't do additional stuff, where I feel like McVay would always like squeeze out all the time. If I could be mistaken, but I feel like,
no, everything was like it seemed like it was just everything's just totally regimented. They got the clocks, the horns go off, people hustle around, and it's like clockwork. It's a well-oiled machine, and they take advantage of every moment that they get there.
Totally. And I think Staley did a good job of that. But so training camp would be from 11 or 9 to 11. And there were a few, remember being there, and it was done at like 10:20. And I remember asking, did I ask one of the staffers? I think I asked one of the staffers, like, why is it so early? Are they just like trying to get out of the heat? And it was like, well, no, coach scripts it out. If they get done early, they get done early. So he's not going to. So I'm curious if this year, if they get done early, it's like, okay, well, let's do some different installs or have some back or stuff. Or if he liked that system, because I think they were able to get a lot more classroom time, a lot more weight room time and stuff like that. So that's one thing I'll be kind of looking for is if Staley runs it the same, which I think he's ran a really good camp these 2 years. I know people have opinions about him, in game day situations, but in terms of preparedness and readiness, I think most weeks the team looks prepared. They might, have up and down situations, or he might have up and down play calling or decision making, but I think they always do seem prepared for the most part. I think that's how he ran his training camps, but I'm just curious if they'll do some different extensions this year.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. This should probably be at the top of our list of things that we're excited to see is Kellen Moore.
Yes,
and you'll be able to speak to the differences of how pre and post Kellen Moore offenses are looking. So,
yeah, definitely. I mean, I cannot wait to watch Kellen Moore. I mean, it's gonna be so fun to watch him unleash this offense, and you never know how much they'll show on days where media and fans are allowed, because obviously there's closed practice days and stuff like that. But I felt like with Joe Lombardi, which is so interesting because they were so bad at this, but I felt like at training camp, they did a lot of red zone work, like way more than like they would do 11 on 11 stuff. They would do 7 on 7 stuff, but I feel like they did a lot of red zone work, and it just never like transferred over because they just, obviously that was one of their biggest weaknesses in the regular season was the red zone. So I'm curious if Kellen Moore will, I mean, obviously you have to do red zone work. That's so important. But I wonder how he'll approach it. If it's just repetition or if it's, I think everyone listening here is probably saying like, no, I think it's just the play calling was pretty piss poor and that's why they couldn't get in the end zone. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that'll change. Yeah, I think, I'm excited to see how Kellen Moore will affect Herbert and his kind of aggressiveness throwing the ball. I feel like Herbert is a little bit cautious about interceptions, and in post-game press conferences, he'll get down on himself about those things, which is not something you want to see. And that's Dak Prescott never had that problem.
Yeah,
he seemed to bounce back, and he didn't. He'd push the ball, he'd get aggressive, he would try to make some bad throws to get an explosive play and then just bounce back from it. And I don't know if you can change a quarterback's stripes that much in terms of being a little bit more confident about just kind of ripping it in there, even if it doesn't seem like the receiver is open.
Yeah. I mean, he just needs Phillip Rivers to come and tutor him a little bit. He just fine slinging it all over the place. So, but I agree. I think that'll be fun to watch kind of how they kind of maybe not alter, but shift that mindset a little bit of saying like, and part of that's, trust in yourself, and part of it's trust in your teammates around you. And sometimes, being a good leader is saying like, what, my team has my back. If they trust me, I know they trust me. If I make a mistake, it's not like the end of the world. Like we'll get it the next time. And I trust the defense to make a stop, and we'll do this and that. And that's one thing I think Staley's done a really good job in culture building, is building trust. Now, is there times where he probably should have just punted or not had so much trust in his defense? Yeah, of course. But I think the team would all say like, we know coach trusts us 100%. So we're going to go out and try to prove it. So anyway, that being said, 3 players you're most looking forward to. As I mentioned, there's a lot of exciting players on this roster from top to bottom. I mean, we talked about the Rams last segment on radio, how it's 39 rookies and a lot of new faces outside of Stafford, Kupp, and Donald. Like you're kind of excited about just like the unknown. The Chargers have a lot of known in the sense that there's a lot of star power, offensive line, receiver, obviously the quarterback, defensive line, linebacker, who they brought in, Eric Kendricks, the secondary, one of the best safeties in Derwin James. So hard to choose from, but it is your first one. So you have the pick of the litter. Which 3 players are you most looking forward to seeing?
Well, with the Rams, I get all granular because I know everybody so well, and I didn't mention any stars at all in that segment.
As I expected.
This one, I'm going the complete opposite. I already mentioned Bosa, but just Khalil Mack and Asante Samuel and and Derwin James. I'm just super excited to see those guys and see what they look like. I had the opportunity to watch Jalen Ramsey when he was at camp the last couple of years, and just seeing what a competitor that guy is, and just constantly kind of coaching and talking to his guys in the defensive backfield and seeing that. So I'm excited to see how that kind of dynamic plays out with the Chargers, those defensive leaders and what they do on the defense. And then I'm super excited to see that arm of Herbert and get to know him a little bit more as well. So I'm nothing revolutionary here, but just as a football fan, these are the things that seeing these things live are what makes our jobs fantastic. And you really do learn a lot more seeing it in person than just through the TV screen, and also kind of watching them and how they're processing things and how they're learning things. It's super cool. Yeah,
no, I totally agree. So for me, I'll start with star power, and then I'll go more granular. I'll take the granular approach for you. So start though, I can't wait to watch Eric Kendricks. I think you and I are both big fans of him, having that kind of Minnesota background a little bit, and obviously Eric Kendricks being a UCLA legend here in LA. But I was so pumped when that acquisition happened. I know it was such a bummer to see Tranquil go, which once he was signed, it was kind of the writing on the wall. He'd be gone. But I just think the leadership that Kendricks is going to bring. I think he still has plenty left in the tank for a 2-year deal. And, hopefully having him in there is going to really bring that kind of guiding presence to get Kenneth Murray to where they want him to be after being a first-round pick, to bring newly drafted Diana Henley to be kind of the player that they expect him to be after being drafted. And I think having a guy like Kendricks on the field and off the field gives you a great kind of coach on the field, if you will, outside of just the great coaches they already have. So cannot wait to see Eric Kendricks and what he can do. The other that I'm really excited to watch, Ryan, and I know you'll dive into this more as the season progresses, but safety 2, or you call it free safety position or just whatever, safety 2, not Derwin James, is going to be really interesting to see kind of how that shakes out. Alohi Gilman, I think is as of now, your penciled in starter. I think he finished the year very well last year. Kind of that Rams pedigree, right? He was a 6th round pick he was at a Notre Dame. The Rams love, Jordan Fuller, who was a 6th round pick at Ohio State. So kind of has that going for him a little bit, but he played well. But I think, they drafted JT Woods early last year. He struggled this past year with tackling and pursuit angles, but definitely has talent. Mark Webb Jr., another guy they drafted late, 7th round 2 years ago, but has the pedigree of being a Georgia Bulldog. So Alohi Gilman, I think, obviously is the leader in the clubhouse, but those 2 young guys, I think, will be kind of nipping at his heels. And then the last one I'll talk about, I guess I'm sticking all defense here, but Nasir Taylor is a guy that I think did some really nice things last year. And if JC Jackson is back, which you need to mention, that's obviously going to be super exciting to see him out there. But if he's back and healthy, and you can have JC Jackson, Asante Samuel Jr., and Michael Davis as kind of your slated in 3 corners, I think you're in a really good spot. But I think Nasir Taylor, A, being your 4th corner, is maybe the best 4th corner in football, and B, him having the ability to be corner 3 or 2 if needed. I think he just really showed flashes of like, okay, this is a guy that has a lot of talent, fits this system perfectly of what Brandon Staley wants to do. And so he'll be another one that I think he rose a lot during camp last year as a rookie. And it's going to be fun to watch him kind of where he rises this year, because what I always respect about Brandon Staley is, not always to a T, but he does kind of the best player plays. And it's not just if you're the incumbent. Now, sometimes he'll falter a little bit on that. I think there's been some frustration, last year specifically, of guys that did play that fans didn't think should be playing or shouldn't be suiting up. But I think overall, he does kind of stick to his guns of like, the best player plays. I don't care what your name is or when you were drafted. So this would be another case of that. Hopefully, if he's able to, beat out some guys. So those are kind of my 3 where I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. You mentioned the safety camp battle. Are there any other camp battles that we should be paying attention to, watching any positions up for grabs for the lower tier guys?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably quite a few in terms of just young guys that can push incumbents and see what kind of happens. I think when you look at running back, obviously Austin Ekeler is your absolute starter, but we know he's unhappy with his contract. We know he's on the last year of his contract, and that's not going to affect his playing time, I don't think. But if you're the Chargers, you want to see if you truly have it with Joshua Kelley or Isaiah Spiller. So I think whether it's a battle for RB2 or a battle for kind of some pseudo RB1 reps, it's going to be interesting to see how those two guys kind of really, take a stranglehold on that. I think wide receiver 3 will be fun to watch. I think Quentin Johnston is obviously a lock right now. I think he was kind of given that position after OTAs, but Joshua Palmer is no slouch either. He's a guy that, he's going to have a lot of pride, and he showed some good stuff as wide receiver. When he was able to be wide receiver 3, he showed really good flashes. When he was forced to be wide receiver 1, I don't think he was ready for that role, which wasn't fair for him. But when Allen and Williams were both out, he was kind of forced to be in that. But if he can be a true 3 or 4, I think he has a lot of dynamic ability to him. And then last, I'll say, Ryan, and we'll wrap up as we're up against the clock, but the defensive line has so much depth. Like when you look at your starters as, Morgan Fox, SJD, and Joey Bosa, and Austin Johnson and the Joey, depending if you're going 3-4, 4-3. But I mean, guys they have behind him is you drafted Tui Tuipulotu this year, Scott Matlock this year, Atito Abonia last year, who looked really good before getting injured. I think you and I have talked about, Gerard Clark, who was an undrafted free agent this year out of Coastal Carolina, who we don't know how he went undrafted, and he's on this roster. So much depth at the defensive line. I think we know who's going to start, but it's going to be a really nice rotation with all these players, and it'll be a fun camp battle to see kind of how those trickle out, if you will.
That was is something I'm interested in watching, is how a mind like Staley is going to use Tui Pelotu in his defense. I think there's going to be some light shed on that over the next couple of weeks of training camp.
Yeah, everyone keeps saying he's going to be a stand-up 3-4 edge. I just see him more as a 3-4 hand in the dirt end. So not like a Bosa and Mac. He'd be inside of Bosa and Mac in that kind of 3-tech. That's what I see. I think that's what he did at USC very well. Different system, obviously, but I don't think he's quite fast enough to be a true outside. But then again, Bosa was a 4-3 hand in the dirt, and they moved him outside, and he's done fine. So we'll see. But I see him more as that next to Bosa or next to Mac inside of them and using some of his power. But to your point, I guess we'll see in training camp where he lines up. Any other final thoughts before we wrap up? Your first Chargers camp coming up?
It's going to be a blast, man. I'm just excited to be down there. Like I said before, it's football season's here for us, for the media. It's back. So, I'm just super pumped.
Yeah, me too. It is back. So, cannot wait. But that is all the time we got here on the LA Football Show. Again, live on the Mightier 1090 ESPN Radio, but you can always find us at LAFBnetwork.com. All of our YouTube channels, we have one for every team, but LAFB Network is the main one. You can find them all there. And everywhere you get your podcasts, just search LA Football Show. For Skinny T, Ryan Anderson, I'm Ryan Dyrud. Thank you all for hanging out with us. Have a blessed weekend. We'll talk to you all next week.
You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.